The dusty bench sun was low over Chennai, casting a golden light across the narrow lanes where Sundar Pichai once walked as a quiet boy with curious eyes. The air smelled of tamarind and diesel. Bicycles zipped past stray dogs sleeping under faded posters. Sundar sat on a cracked cement bench just outside the college library. He wore a second-hand shirt 2 sizes too big and sandals with the soles coming apart. In his hands, he held a notebook filled with tiny handwriting and smudged pencil marks. He was 20 years old. His stomach ached with hunger, but he had learned to ignore that feeling. He had something more important to think about: his future. That evening, he waited for someone, not a friend, not a classmate. It was a man he had never met before. A man who might change everything. This man's name was Arun Arun, a visiting alumnus, a software engineer who now worked in Bangalore. He was scheduled to give a talk about life after college, about ambition, about career choices. Students were buzzing about him. They said he drove a scooter with chrome mirrors. They said his shoes were foreign. Sundar didn't care about the scooter or the shoes. He cared about what Arun knew. He had heard Arun sometimes took 1 or 2 students under his wing, recommended them, mentored them. Open doors. Sundar wanted one of those doors. He was not the loudest in class. He was not the top scorer. But he noticed things others didn't, like how a transistor could behave differently in the heat, or how you could fix a broken processor not by replacing it, but by changing the way it cooled. His ideas were strange to some professors, too. Unusual to be understood quickly. Sometimes he would explain his thoughts only to see people stare at him blankly. Still, he didn't stop thinking. When Arun finally appeared on campus, Sundar watched him from a distance. Arun wore a clean white shirt, tucked in with care. He laughed easily, spoke confidently, and greeted professors by name. People gathered around him as if he were a celebrity. Sundar waited until the crowd thinned. His palms were sweaty. He clutched his notebook like it was a shield. And then he stood up and walked over. Double quotes, sir. Can I speak to you for a moment? He asked quietly. Arun looked him up and down. Sure, he said, a little distracted. He checked his watch. Sundar spoke quickly. I've been working on a small project. Something to make communication easier between devices. It's not finished yet, but I think it has potential. I would really appreciate your feedback. I was hoping maybe you might consider. Do you have a resume? Arun interrupted, politely but firmly. Sundar hesitated. No, sir. But I have this notebook. I wrote everything down. Arun smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm sorry. I don't have time right now. Maybe send me an email, okay? And just like that, he turned and walked away. Sundar stood there, frozen. The air around him felt thick. His fingers gripped the notebook tighter. He had imagined this moment going differently. He had imagined Arun seeing his ideas and saying, yes, this boy has something special. Instead, Sundar was left staring at the back of a man walking away. He sat back down on the bench. Around him, the sounds of the campus grew louder. Laughter, chatter, birds returning to their nests. Sundar's notebook sat open in his lap, pages fluttering in the wind. He looked down and noticed a line he had written weeks ago. Don't stop. Just because they don't see it yet. He closed the notebook slowly. Days passed. Then weeks. Sundar didn't email Arun. He didn't see the point. He poured himself deeper into his projects, staying up late in the computer lab, tinkering with motherboards others had thrown away. He started skipping meals to buy used components from roadside vendors. He wrote code until his fingers cramped. He didn't chase recognition anymore. He just wanted to build. Meanwhile, Arun returned to Bangalore, unaware of the quiet fire he had left behind in one disappointed student. Months later, in a quiet lab late at night, Sundar did something no one expected. He built a small device that could transfer commands from one machine to another with almost no delay. It was clunky and crude, but it worked. His roommate, Vishal, saw it and said, "You should show this to someone." Sundar shook his head. Who? Bishal replied. Someone who sees more than resins. The next day, Sundar went to see Professor Balasubramaniam, an old man with kind eyes and a reputation for supporting underdogs. He showed him the device. The professor examined it slowly, pressing buttons, asking questions. Then he looked up and said, "This is very clever." It was the first time Sundar heard those words from someone who mattered. Professor Balasubramaniam arranged for Sundar to present his work at a small seminar. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't recorded. Only a handful of people came. But one of them was a representative from a scholarship program. 2 weeks later, Sundar was awarded funding to apply for postgraduate studies abroad. Not just funding, a full ride. His father cried when he told him, not loudly, just a tear, quickly wiped away. His mother cooked his favorite dish that night and didn't say a word. She just smiled and served him more rice. Soon, Sundar was on a plane for the first time in his life, heading to California. Everything felt strange, the food, the silence on the streets, the cold air. But he didn't care. He had a purpose. And he carried the same old notebook in his backpack. In America, things were hard at first. He had trouble understanding some accents. He felt like an outsider. He lived in a tiny room with a heater that barely worked. He missed home deeply, but each day he got stronger. His code got faster. His ideas got sharper. And people started to notice. One day, a company called Google came to his university for a small recruiting event. Sundar stood in line, notebook in hand. He didn't have a polished resume. Just stories about the devices he built in India. He didn't try to impress. He just spoke from the heart. After his short interview, one of the recruiters said, "You think differently. We like that." Sundar didn't smile. Not yet. He had learned not to expect too much. But weeks later, he received an offer. It was more money than he had ever seen. He stared at the email for hours. Not because he didn't believe it, but because he was thinking of the dusty bench. The moment Arun Mehta had walked away. How far he had come since then. He joined Google. With quiet confidence. He worked long hours, didn't complain. Built quietly. His tools were sharp. His code was clean. And slowly people began to realize that Sundar wasn't just another engineer. He was a builder, a listener, a thinker. Over the years, Sundar rose through the ranks. Not because he shouted. Not because he pushed others down. But because he lifted ideas up. Then one day, much later, he walked into a meeting room where new hires were being welcomed. He scanned the list and saw a name, Arun Mehta. A new hire. Working under him. And the world seemed to go still for a moment. What would you do? Would you walk away? Or would you walk over? Sundar chose to walk over. He extended his hand and said, quietly, "Welcome to the team." Arun looked up, confused at first. Then his face changed. Recognition, surprise, a hint of embarrassment. He stood slowly and shook Sundar's hand, and Sundar smiled because he remembered, but he had already forgiven. Asterisk the shadow of memory when Arun Mehta walked into the sleek glass lobby of Google's Mountain View campus. He felt like a small fish in a giant gleaming ocean. He had spent the last 12 years working at mid-sized firms in Bangalore, slowly rising through the ranks, building back-end systems, managing teams, and delivering projects on time. He was known for being efficient, dependable, a man who did what was asked and did it well, but he had never been here. Never inside a place that felt like the future had already happened. His new role was a step up, a strategic hire for a product team led by someone high up. Someone he hadn't met. Yet, the recruiter had spoken in vague, respectful tones. "You'll be reporting directly to the senior vice president." "It's a big opportunity," she said. Arun had nodded. He liked the sound of that. He felt like his years of hard work were finally paying off. He had not expected Sundar Pichai. When Sundar walked into the orientation room that morning, the air changed. People sat straighter. Some whispered. Arun didn't recognize him immediately. Sundar looked different from the quiet boy he had once brushed off back in Chennai. Now he moved with a calm authority, wearing a dark shirt, simple glasses, and an expression that was both kind and unreadable. He walked up to Arun, extended a hand, and said, "Welcome to the team." And in that instant, the past crashed into Arun like a wave. He remembered the thin, nervous student who had approached him outside the library. He remembered the notebook, the pencil marks, the quiet desperation in the boy's eyes. And he remembered brushing him off. Without a second thought, Arun's face grew warm. He shook Sundar's hand and tried to smile, but something inside him twisted. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in his new apartment, staring at the ceiling. The hum of California traffic outside was different from the chaos of Bangalore. Quieter, colder. He turned on his side. Then back again. Memory played like a film in his mind. That boy. That moment. How small Sundar had seemed. And now, here, he was not just a senior engineer, not even a director, but a man who led divisions, who helped shape the future of the internet. And Arun was working for him. Asterisk. The next morning, Arun walked into his new team meeting. Sundar wasn't there, but his presence was felt. People spoke of him with quiet respect. Arun listened, nodded, took notes. He kept his head down and focused on the work. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong, not because others made him feel that way, but because of what he had done. He had dismissed someone who was now light years ahead. He had once turned away a future leader, and that was a heavy truth. To carry Dot over the next few weeks, Arun tried to settle in. The work was challenging. The pace was faster than anything he had known, but what struck him most was the culture. Sundar's team didn't operate like the places he was used to. There was no shouting, no showmanship. No one fought to be the loudest voice in the room. Instead, people listened. Ideas were judged by their value, not the title of the person who shared them. It was, in a strange way, humbling. Arun found himself working late into the night again. Not because he was told to, but because he wanted to measure up. He wanted to contribute something that mattered. And beneath all that effort, there was something else, a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, he could earn Sundar's respect. Not because he wanted praise, but because he needed redemption. One evening, Arun stayed behind after a product review. Most of the team had left. He was reviewing notes when he heard a voice behind him. "Still working?" He turned. Sundar was standing in the doorway. Arun stood quickly. "Yes. Just making sure everything's in place for tomorrow's update." Sundar walked in slowly, hands in his pockets. He nodded. "You're doing good work." Arun looked down, unsure what to say. There was a silence between them, thick but not uncomfortable. Finally, Sundar said, "Do you remember Chennai?" Arun's throat tightened. "Yes," he said softly. "I do too," Sundar said. His voice was calm, but his eyes held something deeper. Not anger, not pride, but something quieter. Something closer to understanding. "You were just starting out," Arun said, trying to find the right words. "I didn't know. I didn't see it." Sundar smiled slightly. "No one did, not then." Arun sat down slowly. "I've thought about that day more times than I can count. I wasn't fair to you." "Maybe," Sundar said, "but it helped me." Arun looked up, confused. "If you had said yes," Sundar continued, "I might have followed someone else's path. Maybe I would have stayed in India. Maybe I would have stopped building what I really cared about." He paused and added, "Sometimes being ignored is what teaches you to listen." Arun swallowed hard. He had come here thinking this job would be a step forward. Instead, it was a mirror. A chance to look back at the man he had been, and the chance, perhaps, to become someone better. "Thank you," he said quietly. Sundar nodded. "We all grow, and we all get chances to lift others, even when we didn't before." As Sundar turned to leave, Arun said, "Why'd you hire me?" Sundar paused at the door. "Because I saw someone with good experience, solid work, and the humility to keep learning." He walked out without another word. Arun sat in silence for a long time after that. Something shifted in him that night. Not guilt, Not shame. Growth. He began to mentor younger engineers, not from a place of superiority, but from patience. He listened more, spoke less. When he saw uncertainty in someone's eyes, he didn't brush them off. He stayed. He asked questions. He offered his time. And slowly, his team started to change. People opened up more. Ideas flowed more freely. It wasn't overnight. But it was real. Weeks turned into months. One afternoon, Arun received a calendar invite. It was from Sundar. The subject line was simple. Join me for lunch. They met at a quiet outdoor table near the Googleplex. Sundar didn't talk about work. He asked about Arun's family, about Bangalore, about what had changed. Do you ever miss India? Sundar asked. Every day, Arun said. Me too, Sundar replied. But sometimes you have to leave the familiar to grow, Arun nodded. Then he asked the question he had been carrying. Since that first week, do you ever think about how people treated you before all this? Sundar thought for a moment. Sometimes. But mostly, I think about the people who helped me, the ones who gave me a chance. Even when others didn't? Arun asked. Sundar looked at him. Especially then. The meal ended with a quiet smile between them. No grand forgiveness speech. No dramatic apology. Just two men connected by a moment in the past, now walking forward together. But life, as always, has its own plans. A few months later, the company faced a major crisis. A product malfunction, user data leak, panic spread. Media buzzed, engineers scrambled. Sundar had to step in personally. And in the middle of the chaos, one of Arun's old code segments was flagged. Something he had written. Something that now posed a risk. All eyes turned toward him. And suddenly, redemption seemed very far away. Asterisk, the break in the kada, the silence in the conference room was heavier than any noise. Large glass walls reflected the worried faces of dozen engineers, all of them staring at the big screen mounted on the far wall. It showed numbers, data points, timestamps, error logs, but the meaning behind them was louder than words. Millions of users, compromised access, a vulnerability. That should have been caught. It wasn't just a glitch. It was a crack in the very system people trusted. And somewhere deep in that chain of code was Arun Mehta's name. He stood quietly near the back, his arms crossed over his chest, his heart pounding with a rhythm he hadn't felt in years. Segment, said Maya, one of the senior engineers, pointing to a line of legacy code, was written before the new security protocols. It's not malicious, but it opened a door we didn't see. Sundar didn't say anything. He stood in the corner, eyes focused, calm but not still. His mind was moving fast. Arun could see that in the way his gaze flickered between the data and the people in the room. Maya continued. It was part of the internal transfer module for third-party integration. The audit trail links it to a patch built 6 months ago. Everyone turned toward Arun. He didn't flinch. He took a step forward, voice steady. I wrote that patch. It was meant to fix latency during bulk data sync. It worked during tests. I didn't know it left anything open. No one said anything. For a moment, and then Sundar spoke. It's not about blame, he said. It's about responsibility and how we fix it. His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't even disappointed. It was focused. Clear. Arun nodded. Then let me fix it. That night, Arun didn't go home. He stayed in the office with a handful of engineers, digging through every thread of code he had touched since joining. Not to protect himself, not to erase, but to understand. To take ownership. He skipped meals, didn't check his phone, didn't sleep. Every line of code became a confession, every test a form of penance. He wasn't afraid of being fired. What scared him more was that he might let Sundar down again, not as a boss, but as a man who had once given him a second chance. The next morning, just before dawn, he found it. A conditional loop. It had worked under normal conditions, but under heavy strain, it delayed a security check. Not enough to be noticed during testing, but enough to leave a vulnerability open for a few seconds. It was a small hole, but enough for someone to step through. He fixed it, and then, without hesitation, he wrote a full report, explaining the error, how it had happened, and what had been done to correct it. No excuses, no softening. Just truth. He said it directly. To Sundar, then sat back in his chair, eyes burning with fatigue. He didn't know what would happen next. But he felt peace. Strange, quiet peace. Later that morning, Sundar called a meeting with the senior team. He walked in, holding a printed copy of Arun's report. I read this 3 times, he said. Not because I doubted it, but because it reminded me why we trust each other. He held up the report. This is what responsibility looks like. Not hiding, not deflecting, but facing mistakes and fixing them. We don't expect perfection. We expect integrity. No one said anything. Some nodded. Others simply looked at Arun with new respect. After the meeting, Sundar found Arun in the hallway. You didn't have to stay all night, Sundar said quietly. I did, Arun replied. Not just for the team, for myself. Sundar paused, then asked something unexpected. Do you remember what I said back then, in Chennai, when you walked away? Arun shook his head slowly. Neither do I, Sundar said, with a small smile. But I remember how it felt, and that feeling helped shape me. Sometimes, small moments leave large shadows. They walked side by side. 2 men carrying different pasts, but walking the same present. As the crisis passed and the system stabilized, a sense of calm returned to the office. But inside Arun, something was still shifting. He had spent most of his life trying to move up, trying to prove he belonged in the room. Now he wanted something different, to make sure others didn't feel like he once made Sundar feel forgotten. Invisible. So he started paying attention. Asterisk, he noticed the new intern sitting quietly during meetings. He started inviting them for short feedback sessions, asking them about their ideas. He noticed a young engineer named Rima, whose reports were detailed, but always buried beneath louder voices. He pulled her aside and asked her to present the next review. She did, and her idea changed the direction of the project. One evening, as Arun packed up to leave, he found a small envelope on his desk. No name, just a folded note inside. The handwriting was shaky. Asterisk. Thank you for noticing me. He stared at the note for a long time. His eyes burned again, but not from lack of sleep. Something in his chest cracked open. A feeling he couldn't quite name. Not pride, not success. Something quieter. Something deeper. Then the phone rang. It was his sister, calling from Bangalore. Her voice was shaky. His mother had fallen, broken her hip. She would need surgery. Arun booked a flight immediately. Before he left, informed Sundar, expecting a polite nod. Instead, Sundar said, take your time. Family is everything. Arun looked at him. Thank you. Truly, Sundar nodded. I'll cover what you can. Don't worry. As Arun boarded the flight, he looked out the window and thought about how strange life was, how one act of rejection had led to a circle of unexpected grace. But life wasn't finished with its tests. While in Bangalore, a relative brought news. Something strange. A small tech firm had been quietly using some of Sundar's early designs. Old code, stolen from an unreleased prototype that Sundar had built during his university years. And Arun knew instantly. He had seen those designs before. Not in any shared folder. But in a notebook. A very specific notebook. The one Sundar had shown him years ago. And someone somewhere had copied what they didn't understand. The betrayal wasn't just technical. It was personal. And the trail pointed back to a name Arun had hoped never to see again. Asterisk, the stolen notebooker in Meta had not expected to feel so much like a stranger in his own city. The streets of Bangalore had changed since he'd last walked them regularly. New buildings, unfamiliar cafes, rows of scooters now replaced by rideshare cars and neon-lit storefronts. But the scent in the air, a mix of monsoon damp cement, street food smoke, and 1,000 stories in motion, that was the same. And under that familiar air, An unfamiliar worry tugged at his mind. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. His mother was recovering slowly after her surgery. He sat with her in the hospital each day, holding her hand, helping her eat, reading aloud. From old newspapers just to hear her laugh again. But each night, when he returned to his small hotel room and locked the door behind him, his mind drifted back to the conversation he had with his cousin Vivek, a mid-level software consultant with a big mouth and an even bigger love for gossip. You remember Baldev? Vivek had asked over tea, stirring his cup too fast. Arun frowned. The same Baldev from my Itundra. Thick glasses? The one and only. He's got this little company now, works in AI stuff. Nothing big, but he's been bragging lately. Says he's sitting on a gold mine. He showed me this old code snippet once, claiming it was his. Arun leaned in. What kind of code? Vivek shrugged. Didn't mean much to me. Something about optimizing commands between linked devices. Said it was his university project. I don't know. Maybe he's legit, but it looked old. Arun went very still. Was it handwritten? Yeah, like from a scanned notebook or something. Why? Arun's breath caught in his throat. That couldn't be a coincidence. He had seen that code before. Not in Bangalore. Not in any corporate system. He had seen it 2 decades ago, inside a small, worn notebook held in the hands of a skinny boy on a bench in Chennai. Sundar. The memory was sharp now. Clear like a shard of glass. Sundar approaching him shyly. That notebook clutched in both hands, lines of scribbled logic written in pencil, margins full of notes and equations. Arun hadn't looked closely back then. He hadn't cared to. But now his mind filled in the missing pieces. And he knew. Baldev had stolen Sundar's early designs and was using them. He didn't just copy a few lines. He had built a business. On them. Arun didn't sleep that night. He kept seeing Sundar's face, the quiet grace he carried, the forgiveness he had offered without ever being asked, the way he had given Arun a second chance without holding a grudge. This wasn't just a matter of stolen code. It was a betrayal of something much deeper. It was history being twisted. Someone taking credit for work he didn't understand, work that Sundar had bled for. The next morning, Arun put on a clean shirt and walked into Baldev's office. It was smaller than he expected. 2 rooms, a shared kitchen, and a group of fresh graduates typing away on outdated laptops. The walls had peeling posters of futuristic graphics and a whiteboard filled with buzzwords. And there, in the corner, sat Baldev, older now, thicker, hairline retreating, but still wearing those same thick glasses. Arun, Baldev stood with forced cheer, arms open. Long time. What brings you here? I heard you're working on something exciting, Arun said, keeping his voice light. Baldev laughed, gesturing to the papers on his desk. Just the usual, trying to make something useful. Heard you're using some old code, Arun said, still smiling. Baldev hesitated. You know how it is? All ideas build on others. Arun nodded slowly. Then he reached into his bag and placed something on the table. A printout. It was a scanned page from Sundar's old notebook. Years ago, during a cleanup of legacy systems, Arun had come across an old internal test file with scanned designs, one of Sundar's earliest. He had saved a copy, not because he expected to use it, just because something in it had moved him. Now it sat between them like a truth. That could not be denied. Baldev's single quotes as failed. Where did you get that? He asked too quickly. The real question is, where did you get it? Arun said. Baldev opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked smaller now. Not because of guilt. Because he had been caught. You showed this to Vivek, Arun said. Told him it was yours. You've been using this as a foundation for your product. This isn't inspired work. This is stolen. Baldev scoffed. It's old. No one owns that anymore. That's not how it works, Arun said. It's not just code. It's legacy. What are you going to do? Baldev asked, folding his arms. Run to the press? Sue me. No, Arun said quietly. I'm going to tell the man who wrote it. Baldov's face changed again. Pichai? He's not going to care. He's too big now? You don't know him at all, Arun replied later that week, back in California. Arun requested a private meeting with Sundar. He didn't explain much over email. Just a single line. I need to talk to you. It's important. Asterisk, they met in Sundar's office, a wide room. Surprisingly simple, with soft light filtering through large windows and shelves, filled not with trophies, but with books. Sundar greeted him with his usual quiet warmth, but Arun's face was serious. I found something in Bangalore, he began, then told him everything. Sundar didn't interrupt. Didn't move. Just listened. When Arun placed the printed notebook scan on the table. Sundar's eyes stayed on it for a long time. He reached out and ran his fingers across the paper slowly, as if remembering the feel of the original pages, the ones he had written in hunger and hope, the ones he had once shown to a man who hadn't cared. I don't know how Baldov got this, Arun said, but he's been using it, selling it as his own. The silence between them grew thick. Finally, Sundar said, I wondered what happened to that notebook. Arun looked at him. Do you want to go after him? Sundar didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out the window for a long time. Then he said, I want to talk to him. Personally? Yes. Arun hesitated. Why? Because sometimes what people fear most is being seen by the person they wronged, not sued, not punished, just seen. A week later, a meeting was arranged. A small office, a plain table, 3 chairs. Sundar, Arun, Baldev. When Sundar entered the room, Baldev didn't stand. He didn't speak. His eyes flicked to the floor. Then back to Sundar. I remember you, Baldev said, his voice tight. I'm sure you do, Sundar replied. Arun watched the two men silently. This wasn't about business. This wasn't about law. This was something older, deeper, unfinished. You took something that wasn't yours, Sundar said softly. And you didn't even understand what it cost. I didn't think you didn't have to think, Sundar said. You just had to care. The room went quiet. Then Sundar did something unexpected. He stood up, walked to the window, and said, You can keep the company, but you will issue a public correction, a statement, and you will give credit, not to me, to the idea, and to the truth. Baldev blinked. That's it. That's enough, Sundar said. Because I'm not here to take anything back. I'm here to make sure it's no longer stolen. Asterisk, the meeting ended without drama. As they stepped outside, Arun turned to Sundar. Why didn't you go further? Sundar smiled gently. Because sometimes, he said, the weight of being forgiven lasts longer than the weight of being punished. And then, as they walked back to the car, Sundar paused and said something Arun would never forget. No, he said, the world remembers who gets credit. But life remembers who chooses grace. But life was not done testing that grace. A sudden decision from the board, a restructuring. And Sundar would soon be asked a question he never expected to hear. Are you ready to step down? Asterisk, the weight of the chair. They fell hard that night. And California, loud against the rooftop of the Googleplex's newest wing. It was late. The parking lots were mostly empty. Inside, lights glowed in only a few rooms, casting soft reflections on the glass walls, like memories trying to break in. Sundar Pichai sat alone at the long boardroom table, not as the CEO of one of the most powerful tech companies in the world, but simply as a man, a son, a father, a builder, and above all, someone who never forgot where he came from. Asterisk. In front of him was a letter, not handwritten, not folded. Just the printed sheet of paper with the board's recommendation in clear black. Text. The words didn't surprise him, but they still hurt. They had called it a transition opportunity. A proposal to move him into an advisory role, less public, less central. They said it with respect, with careful smiles. But behind the language, Sundar could hear the message. You've done enough. Now let someone else lead. It wasn't because of the data breach. The issue had been resolved with transparency and care. His reputation remained intact. It wasn't even about a failure. It was about time. The board had begun to hunger for new energy, new public narratives, new leaders who could speak in faster, louder tones. But Sundar had never been loud. He led not with fire, but with steadiness, not with charisma, but with clarity. And now, that very steadiness, once praised, was being quietly nudged aside. The door creaked. Arun stepped in, holding 2 cups of tea. I figured you might still be here, he said. Sundar looked up and smiled faintly. You always know. I asked the front desk if anyone had requested late access. Only your name came up. They sat in silence for a moment. The rain softened outside. Arun sipped his tea and glanced at the letter, but didn't ask. So, he said finally, is it what I think it is? Yes, Sundar said. They want me to make it easier for them, not step down. Just move aside. Arun leaned back in his chair. Are you going to? Sundar looked at him for a long time. Do you remember? Sundar said slowly. When you first joined this team and asked me why I hired you? Arun nodded. Double quotes. I said it was because you had the humility to keep learning. That's still true. But what I didn't tell you is that I was still learning too, every single day. He placed the paper on the table gently. I never wanted this job for power. I took it because I thought I could protect something. The way we build, the way we listen, the way we include the quiet voices. Arun spoke softly. You did that? For a while, Sundar said. But the world is changing. Faster now. Louder. Sharper. I don't know if my kind of leadership fits anymore. Arun shook his head. Maybe the world doesn't need more noise. Maybe it still needs what you bring, especially now. And if they don't see that, then maybe it's time we remind them. The next morning, Sundar called a team-wide town hall. Not flashy, not dramatic, just a quiet gathering. Hundreds of employees sat in that sunlit space, floor-to-ceiling glass behind them. Light falling over anxious faces. Sundar stood at the front with no notes. You may have heard, he began, that I've been asked to consider stepping into a different role, a quieter one. A murmur rippled through the crowd. He raised a hand. I'm not here to fight that decision. I'm not here to hold on out of pride. I'm here because I want to tell you something before the headlines do. He paused, took a breath. When I first walked into this company, I was not the loudest person, not the most confident. But someone listened to me. Someone saw the worth in an idea, not just in the voice presenting it. And that is the culture I tried to preserve. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. We cannot build technology that helps the world if we forget how to listen to each other. Real leadership is not about being the first to speak. It's about making space so others can. He stepped back from the mic. The room was still then. Someone stood up. It was Maya, the senior engineer who had flagged the vulnerability during the crisis. I came here because I believed in the way you led, she said, her voice shaking. And if you leave, we lose that anchor. Others began standing, one by one. Rema, the young developer Arun had mentored, a manager from the India office who had once interviewed with Sundar. A dozen, then 50, then nearly everyone. Arun watched. From the side, something swelling in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Not relief, not pride. Hope. Later that week, the board met again. This time, they faced something they hadn't expected. A letter signed by over 2,000 employees. Not demanding. Not angry. Just honest. A letter about how quiet leadership had shaped loud outcomes. About how trust had built progress. About how stepping aside wasn't always the way forward. The board paused. Reconsidered. And eventually, they offered a compromise. Sundar would stay, not as a placeholder, but with a renewed focus, mentoring, building new labs, nurturing future leaders. The public would see less of him, but the company would feel more of him. And that was all he needed. As the dust settled, Sundar and Arun sat once more on the rooftop balcony overlooking the campus. The same rain from days ago had now given way to a crisp wind. Below them, the lights of the city blinked like memories trying to be remembered. You stayed true, Arun said quietly. Sundar smiled. No, he replied. We did. But as the wind blew harder, Sundar's phone, VIBRATD, he picked it up. Frown. A security flag. Someone from inside had access to restricted archive. A file. From Sundar's first days at Google. A file that should have been deleted long ago. His smile faded. Because sometimes the past doesn't just return. Sometimes. It never left. Asterisk, the first file night had fallen across Silicon Valley. But the city below the hills didn't sleep. Glass towers glowed like embers, and inside the Googleplex, the soft hum of servers blended with the distant echo of footsteps. Sundar Pichai stood alone in his private office, holding his phone tightly. On the screen was a single alert, unauthorized. Access attempts legacy drive, Project Phoenix Alpha, access denied. His fingers hovered over the screen. His heart, usually so calm, now beat slower and heavier. Phoenix Alpha. Few people even remembered that name. It wasn't a product, it was an idea. His very first project after joining Google. Not public, not launched, just raw designs. A quiet attempt to imagine how different applications could speak to each other across platforms without barriers. It never became real. The tech wasn't ready. The company wasn't ready. And so he had shelved it, locking it inside an archive, and moving. But that code, it had shaped everything he did later, and someone had just tried to steal. It .again, .run arrived minutes later. He didn't ask why he'd been called. He saw it in Sundar's face. The lines of tension around his mouth, the crease in his brow. He sat down across from him, waiting. Someone tried to access the Phoenix archive. Sundar said, .arun stiffened. How? I thought it was wiped. It wasn't. I kept it off grid. Read-only access. No one else had the key. Sundar hesitated, then added, until 6 months ago. I gave temporary access to a small review team, in case we ever wanted, to revive parts of the framework. Arun didn't respond. But something in his eyes shifted. Who was on the list? He asked. Sundar turned the monitor toward him. Names flashed across the screen. And there it was. Ravi Mahadeen. A slow breath. His shoulders fell back. I should have known. Sundar looked at him. Who is he to you? He was on my team years ago. A quiet engineer. Smart. Ambitious. Too ambitious. I once recommended him for a fast-track program at my last company. He bypassed peers, got promoted early, and eventually he got bitter. He thought the system owed him more. He's at one of our partner labs. Now, Sundar said, working on a protocol that sounded familiar. Too familiar. Arun closed his eyes for a moment. I didn't see it then, he said. I let it happen. Sundar sat back. Silent. The betrayal wasn't personal, not at first. It wasn't loud like Baldev's. It was quieter. Someone slipping in through cracks, borrowing brilliance and calling it his own. But the damage was no less deep, because this time it wasn't just code being stolen. It was trust. The next day, a formal inquiry was launched. Ravi was questioned. He denied everything, said he was researching legacy ideas, said anything that resembled Sundar's work was coincidence. But the metadata told the truth. TIMES, file names, access logs. He had copied parts of Phoenix, restructured them, added his own name, submitted it as original. The legal team began preparing a response, but Sundar stopped them. I want to speak to him first. It's a risk, the advisor said. It could be used against you. Then let it be. They met in a small room with no windows. Ravi entered with a practiced calm, but his eyes flicked nervously. Sundar sat across from him. No security, no documents, just quiet strength. Do you know what Phoenix Alpha was? Sundar asked. Ravi hesitated. I've read fragments. The architecture was elegant, and not yours. Silence. You accessed. The file? Sundar said. You repackaged the work. What I want to know is why? Ravi's face twisted slightly. Because people like me don't get heard. I was always just one more engineer. Invisible. If I had shown Phoenix with your name on it, no one would have cared. If I showed it with mine, maybe they'd finally listen. Sundar leaned forward. Dot asterisk. You don't become heard by stealing someone else's voice. You become heard by listening to your own. Easy for you to say, Ravi snapped. You're Sundar Pichai. Sundar's voice didn't rise. I wasn't always. He let those words hang in the air. Then he stood up and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he said, you had a chance to build something real. Instead, you chose shortcuts. And shortcuts don't make leaders. They make shadows. Ravi was terminated the next day. The company chose not to press charges. Not because Sundar was soft, but because he believed the damage done to a person's conscience was punishment enough. And the internet never forgets. But something had shifted in him. Asterisk after the Phoenix breach, Sundar began to withdraw from the spotlight. Even more, not out of fear, not out of sadness, out of clarity. Asterisk.